Good evening and welcome to Open Doors community service production of After Service or something like that. Good. I did. I did. You know, so for those of you who didn't see it because it wasn't online or what you saw was not what you expected and it was truncated. Um, we had some audio issues on Sunday, and we ended up starting late, and it just had to be we couldn't have the online service, and what it turned out being was we use a software that's called OBS to manage our broadcast, our streaming, and when you have a sound set up, there's a volume slider that adjusts how loud it is for people online. And at some point, somebody had turned it all the way down. In fact, yours right now is turned almost all the way down. So I'm going to turn you back up. Say hello. Yeah,
Hello
there we
again.
go. That's weird because the fact that I said it, it makes me wonder if I hit the scroll wheel like in the wrong place, if it just turns it down. So,
Yeah, because I don't think someone would do. I don't think any of our people would do that on purpose. I think they probably
oh no, no.
no. They're great people. So
No, it was
yeah,
just one of those things. And
one of those things.
so, if anybody's wondering what happened Sunday, I'll just tell you real quick in terms of what the service was. So, Brian, you were you had. Do you mind if I share? I'm not going to
No,
go
I
into
had, I
detail.
had a hernia surgery.
Yeah,
So
and I took over the service, which I do a few times a year, and rather than doing a regular message, we did something that we used to do pre-pandemic, which is 3 times a year. Anytime that Sunday occurs 5 times in a month, we would do what we called a worship Sunday, which is a service just really focused on the
worship.
practice of worship. What was a little different this time is we took the theme of hope, which has been the topic of the sermons of late, and made that into a devotional. I think you described it as kind of a cantata, but it was a couple of songs, a scripture reading, a devotional reading, and some a brief time of reflection. And we just cycled through that 4 times, maybe only 3 times. I'm trying to remember because it yeah, I did
Painful
make it.
memories.
I know it. I've had much more stressful Sundays. What it felt like to me was it felt disjointed. I think the term I used was rinky dink. There was
Mm.
just something about it that felt, like double A ball as opposed to, Major League Baseball. It's like, oh, well, this is okay. Which
The
bothers,
format. The format.
not the format, something about not being online.
Oh, okay.
It just, and knowing that we're missing some of our audience,
Mm.
maybe a little sad, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that I did, which you didn't see, is occasionally I would just kind of start laughing because I recognized that what was happening was that a message of hope was not reaching people. And it may, not to dig too much into spiritual warfare, but that there were probably people who needed to hear that, and that it was undermined
Mm.
by, and what I was laughing at was like, you fool, not me, but the enemy.
Yeah.
Like, you think that that's going to stop this. All right. You know, and almost laughing joyously because I'm like, you think that what we are doing is so important that you need to interrupt it. Wow, what a privilege.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
hope that doesn't sound hokey, but that was a little
Not to
bit of
me.
what that was a little bit of what I was feeling
Okay.
on that. Now, because most of y'all didn't see any kind of sermon or message, the question is, what are we talking about?
We talked about that on the third, and you wanted to talk about emotionalism in worship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a topic that's really important to me. What's interesting is during one of the songs on Sunday, it's a song I only do like once a year. It's a song about how to grieve, not how to grieve, but how to walk alongside somebody who's grieving. You probably vaguely remember a song called "Come Close Now," and the analogy is the person who is grieving is in a house that's on fire and they're tied up to a chair and they can't leave. And everybody is trying to untie it or throw water on them or telling them how they can get out of the burning house. But really, the only thing you can do is sit with that person while the house burns down around them. And so there's not words, there's no quick fix, there's no way you can expedite the grieving process. The best thing you can do for somebody who is grieving is to demonstrate your love for them by sitting with them through that pain. Don't worry about assuaging anything that they're feeling. There aren't words for that. But there's comfort in saying, I know this hurts. Can I just sit with you? So it's a song's really special to me, and I don't do it very often. I usually just try to work it into a worship Sunday every once in a while, and I did that, and I had to stop, or at least pause for a moment, because I was getting overwhelmed with emotion during that. And so when we talk about emotionalism, I want to differentiate between the manufacturing.
Can you define it?
Right.
Yes. What are we talking about?
Yeah, and there's a nuance there that I think that we have to consider, that there is the manufacturing of an emotional response, and then there is authentic, and there's a very fine line between those things. And an emotional response in worship, if you know what you're doing, and I don't mean this in a manipulative way, but it's not difficult to lead people as a worship leader into a place that's like an emotional high with worship. Either you're overwhelmed with love, you're overwhelmed with the moment, that you all of your understanding takes a back seat to how you feel in that moment.
That's what I wanted to push, and I think that's the piece, that last line that I really like, where your mental capacity takes the back seat.
Yeah,
I think that's key, because we both agree that there should be emotion in worship.
Yeah,
and there's a difficult, or as you put it, a fine line between manipulation and persuasiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these times I need to do the book of Philemon, because in that book, Paul is being almost manipulative in getting his friend Philemon to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, he owned the slave. Yeah,
right, Onesimus, and he's it's like, if you consider me a friend, then you should do this. Like, that's pretty close to manipulating, you know.
Yeah.
And yet, wait a minute, but there's no problem with that. So we need to think really carefully about how we do that. And I like what your point was of that if the emotion is a response to what's happening intellectually, that's different, I think, is what you're saying, than emotion that has no real basis in truth.
Here's how I would equate it. It's love in a relationship that is new, that is primarily infatuation. It hits hard, it's overwhelming, but it's not a sustainable feeling. Versus love in a committed relationship where it has moments of intensity, but ultimately is a sustainable long-term love that's based on knowing a person, connecting with them on a regular basis. And emotionalism in worship to me is very similar to infatuation. It's like a shallow relationship with God that's based on how you feel when you worship, as opposed to, I already know you and love you, and I am feeling very connected with you now. And I've been subject to that, and treated that emotional response as a bit of an idol, as if somehow if I wasn't having an emotional response, if I wasn't overwhelmed in that kind of infatuatory way, that maybe I wasn't really worshiping. And as a worship leader, and being aware of other churches and how they worship, there are certain churches that really hit that. If you're not really worshiping, if you're not responding in a specific way. And there's almost a shame associated with that. Like, why aren't you this? And it leads people to manufacture an emotional response, to fake an emotional response, because, well, I don't want to be that person that isn't raising my hands, that's not falling on the ground crying or whatever. And some of it's manufactured, some of it's legitimate, but gosh, I really want people, when they hit those emotional highs, for that to be based on a really well-founded relationship, and not just on, I want to feel this right now, because that leaves you feeling really hollow when you don't have that high of emotionalism. Does that make sense?
It does. What I'm thinking about is, well, there's two directions that are not okay. And we've been picking on one of them a little bit here.
Yeah, right.
Of the certain types of church services that's all about hype and getting you to an emotional state, and it's thin on truth. It's thin on depth of a relationship.
Right, yeah.
But there's the other side of it too, that it's all truth and emotion is frowned upon. Right. How dare you be that? And that doesn't seem to be okay either to me.
I agree. Well, it's like the argument or the debate between faith versus works. They are two sides of the same coin. They work together. It's not this or that situation. So, pure, intellect, rationale, reason, head without emotion is pretty hollow.
Yeah.
It's
dead.
It's dead. Yeah. It's contractual almost. Right? It's, if I do these things, then, if I follow these things, I know these things are true, I will do these. But there's what's behind that, and I go back to kind of a marriage relationship. I can fulfill all my duties as a husband and be, I can be faithful, I can protect my family, I can provide for my family, and I can also give them nothing emotionally. No love, no kindness.
There's no joy when you see your child. There's no joy when you see your wife.
Right. It's just mechanical.
But there's the other side, which you gave a good analogy of. It's that first crush, moments of crush, right, when you go home after the date and you're on cloud 9 and you're like, woo, this is great. which is an oak, which I think would be a fine place to start,
Yeah.
but not stay.
Yeah. Right. You'd like to know. I mean, you should feel that joy. You should feel overwhelming gratefulness and value when you know that someone loves you so much that they sacrifice so much. You should feel that. That's an appropriate response, but it's not the only response. And it's
So
why
how do we do that?
songs like
Go ahead.
In Christ Alone, which we did on Sunday, are great songs. It's a hymn, but it's got a great balance because it has scripturally, it's so solid. And yet it also takes you to these places emotionally where you're like, it's almost celebratory at the same time. And so I agree, when people are introduced to the faith, I mean, some people want to be convinced, but debate seldom leads to a relationship. Where it has to, this is my perspective. I don't know many people that have been debated into Christianity. I do know.
I bet you there's somebody, but it's not normal. No,
Right. C.S. Lewis, I think, was pretty close to that.
pretty close.
Pretty close.
He described it as kicking and screaming into the kingdom.
Right. I think that there's a personal, emotional aspect that goes with that. So you can provide people with the information they need and they can process that, but they can also reject it. We talked a bit how emotions are powerful and yet they're not always to be trusted, right? So
And yet sometimes the appeal of the whole thing is to your emotions. And I don't know that that's necessarily bad, but let me switch gears to a moment. It's like, so one of the arguments that people make is that this is an art. This is why you need to do things like hymns, or you need to have super rich theological songs. But what if the songs are only to remind you of truths, not necessarily there to teach you?
Right. Well, you've heard the term 7-11. 7 words chanted 11 times, and people use that as a criticism against modern worship.
And emotionalism, yes, that's just emotionalism.
Right. And it's the fact is that it could be just emotionalism.
Yes, of course.
And I would counter that a bit to say sometimes it's the vehicle. I told this to Sam the other day related to bread. Bread is the vehicle for the meat on the sandwich. That's all it's there for. And sometimes there are songs like 7-Elevens that they are the vehicle to get you to the place where you're worshiping. If you have a tough time getting out of your head, that by repeating something multiple times, and it's one of the things that is the detractor and the positive of the Catholic Church's form of worship, which is very repetitive, ritualistic. It can be very powerful if there is actual personal faith behind that. And I think the same thing for these, for certain simplistic songs that aren't hymns, that they become a vehicle to take you to a place that you might hesitate to enter in, or that you're distracted.
Yeah.
When I sing Amazing Grace, which is a wonderful song, it's one of my, which also we did on Sunday, that we are so used to that song and the lyrics of that song that we very seldom connect with that song. It's been stripped of emotion for some people, or it's stripped of its real meaning because it's been repeated so frequently. And I think if you took one verse of Amazing Grace and sang it over and over again, at some point you would start to go, wait a minute, there's something here I hadn't really thought of before. To explore that. I mean, that's a little different than emotionalism, but it's, there's so many just nuances to it. Anyway, go ahead. You have another thought.
I was just thinking about it. It's like, for the people who don't like them, are they asking too much of a song to be able to engage deeply you mentally as well as spur you emotionally? Is that asking too much? Meaning, should the song simply remind you of truths you learned when you did your own personal Bible study, from the sermons through your own faith that you already have, the truth you already have in your head, and it just simply trigger that? Oh yes, he loves me. Oh, because of this, and he's done this for me, and he's done that for me. Not because the song is saying it, but it reminds you of those things and gets you to the place of emotion.
Right. I think as long as it's scripturally accurate, even if it's not theologically, even if it's not theologically rich, that's fair. Think about a movie that you watch that has nothing to do with your life, but connects you with a way that you have felt or something you have experienced, and it takes you to that place. The movie is not reflecting your life, but it's the vehicle to get you to that place where you can reflect on that. And a movie doesn't have the same. Worship music has a lot of weight behind it in terms of responsibility,
and it does teach.
And it does teach. And there's studies that show that people learn more from hymns and worship music about the Bible than they do reading the Bible themselves. That's a separate conversation.
It is, but still, I get, because my point is like when I said I wonder if we ask too much of it, because of the point you just made of, are people if people took their time to actually pay attention to the sermon or do their own Bible study and all of this, then they would have the foundation for the relationship, that the emotionalism that the worship leader is producing would not be baseless, because you have it in you already. Right.
It's really, gosh, there's two things, right? If you're new to Christianity, if you're really new in your faith, it's that the infatuation does draw you in, but it can't be the only thing. It's like eating cotton candy, because it just melts in your mouth and it's gone.
Yeah.
If you already have that foundation, that basis of faith and truth, then it's, in many ways, it's a reminder of that first blush of love.
Yeah, that's what I'm going at. Yeah, right there. Because I think some of us older people who've been in the faith for a long time, we know the truth. We know it really well, right? At least in our tradition, we know it really well. But what we forget is the emotion, and we need to be reminded of that.
Yeah. I think it's important not to, I want to be careful that people don't think we're demonizing emotionalism.
No,
it shouldn't be an idol, but it's like faith and works, that discussion, heart and head, they both need to be a part of who you are as a child of God.
Absolutely. That he needs to go, your mind should be mentally stimulated. You should have, this is truth. It should move from there to your heart, to where you go, yes, Jesus, this is amazing. And from that to some sort of physical demonstration, even if it's just a smile.
Yeah.
Something. Because if you're emotionally connected, then physically there's some sort of, even if it's you smile because your dog is wagging your tail at you, like, oh, right. Something. So, but you're right. Worship should be a response to truth.
Right. And that's one of the challenges, honestly, of a worship Sunday, is that it's like, what am I creating for people here?
Yeah, that's true.
Is it a cotton candy experience, or do I want them to come away there with some substance here? That first, it's practice, which sounds kind of strange, but it really is. It's the way I described it on Sunday is like our 24 hours of prayer that we do occasionally. A lot of times our prayers are these 2 or 3 minute little bursts. And when we think about, could I do that for an hour? Like, oh, that seems overwhelming, until you start to do it and you realize as you do it more, the richness that is
Yeah.
exposed in that. And I feel like worship is a very similar thing, that you kind of have to get past what you're used to doing to the
Hmm.
point where you're like, I'm here,
Yeah.
and I'm going to relish the experience. You know, one of my big worship breakthroughs was a similar thing where there was kind of a standard worship set, and then they had the after worship set for people who wanted to hang around. I'm like, well, I got nothing better to do. I'll hang out here. And it was really soaking worship, which at first I'm like, this is dumb. I mean, literally, I'm like, this is dumb. I shouldn't be here. I can't leave because there's only 7 of us here. It'll be really obvious that I'm just ditching. I'm like, no, no, you're here. Be present. What is this? Why are you here? What does this mean? Have an honest conversation with him now. And worship for me became this very raw, honest, emotional, but
But based on
honest,
truth.
based on truth. And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever felt. But I don't expect that every time. I just have to be open to the invitation and willing to be drawn in.
So as we wrap up,
Yeah.
a couple of things I'm thinking. One is, I think for the next worship one, I think even spending more time thinking about how we can craft that well to
Mm-hmm.
help people get there, and thinking about what we can do. I don't know how that would look, but that's a piece. The other one is, and I've toyed with it and done it a couple of times. If worship is supposed to be a response to truth, should we put the sermon early in the service? So they get a bunch of head full of truth, and then they respond to it. What do you think? People
Well,
don't like it though.
it's well, it's a lot about routine.
Yeah.
We get used to routine, and when you take that routine away, we get uncomfortable. But sometimes that's exactly what we need. We need it to be turned over a bit, to go, hey, here's my routine. We're going to do 4 songs, sermon, communion, 1 more song, and I get to go home and watch the football game. And when you flip that over and say, we're going to hit you with a bunch of truth, and then we're going to respond to that truth. It's like, you and your family have been doing strength training lately, right? And if you do the same 3 exercises all the time, you get stronger, and then you plateau because your body is used to the routine and has gotten really efficient at those 3 things. And then you throw in something completely different, and all of a sudden your body goes, whoa. Well, the growth is in breaking the routine and introducing something to stimulate that growth, still
Being uncomfortable.
right. And we should embrace that. I actually tell my clients that all the time. You are going to be uncomfortable as we go through this process together, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was lots of things tonight. Grateful to whoever's out there. I have no idea who you are, for listening as we kind of ramble a bit, but it's something that I could talk a lot about because it's very personal to me, and I appreciate you coming along for the ride.
Oh, yeah. I like having different topics like that. Doesn't always have to be about me.
All right.
As I roll my eyes.
Right.
No, yeah. If you guys have particular topics that you find interesting, let us know. We'd love to chat about them.
Now, last thing before we go, I will not be there this Sunday.
Right.
And so perhaps next week, if I don't get around to watching the sermon, shame on me, probably won't, that if there's another topic that you'd like us to address that maybe not from the from the message on Sunday. Throw it out there. We'd be interested in chatting about those things. And as we're heading into fall, this is a time when all these really rich topics, for some reason, are really attractive to me. So,
all right, you guys have a great night, and we will see some of you at least on Sunday morning.
take care.
Take care.